A kinship is expected to champion your aspirations and offer steadfast encouragement, not demolish them. I, Logan, devoted 5 solid years to working extended shifts, diligently amassing every dollar, and committing numerous compromises to finally secure my initial apartment unit. It was my private haven, my tangible achievement, my bedrock for the future. Then came that staggering afternoon when my parents insisted I liquidate it to finance my sister Jocelyn's protracted divorce. Upon my firm refusal, they actually initiated legal proceedings against their own son. Before I elaborate on the events that followed, please let me know where you're viewing this from, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to establish a boundary with relatives who overstepped. I grew up in a comfortable, middle-tier household in Philadelphia, perpetually in the shadow of my older sister, Jocelyn. From our earliest moments, the blueprint was apparent. Jocelyn was the cherished offspring, and I was an afterthought. Our parents never attempted to mask their favoritism. When Jocelyn celebrated her 17th birthday, our parents astonished her with a pristine cherry-red sports coupe parked in the driveway adorned with a sizable silver ribbon. They filmed her joyous reaction as she shrieked and leaped enthusiastically. Just 4 months later, on my 17th birthday, I received a booklet containing vouchers for driving lessons at the nearby Automotive Academy. My parents reasoned they had already allocated too much capital to vehicles that year. I made an effort not to display my disappointment. For university, Jocelyn enrolled at a prestigious private institution where she pursued a degree in modern literature. Our parents covered the full cost: tuition, lodging, meal allowances, required reading material, and even walking around money. Concurrently, I, Logan, matriculated at the state-run university and put in 22 hours weekly at the college bookstore just to manage my portion of the expenses. I still finished university with a burden of $32,000 in educational debt, while Jocelyn graduated completely unburdened. Even our shared family trips revolved around Jocelyn. If she expressed a desire to visit California, we headed to California. If she suddenly developed an interest in bobsledding, we miraculously managed a trip to the Rockies that January. My suggestion to tour the National Astronomy Hall of Fame was met with dismissive gestures and remarks about uninteresting science fiction nonsense. Despite all this, I persevered. Following university, I secured a role as a junior systems architect. The remuneration was modest, but I was resolved to create stability for myself. While my contemporaries were spending profusely on new automobiles and weekend excursions, I resided in a small unit with 4 flatmates. I prepared my meals daily, forfeited vacations, and took on supplemental programming assignments on Saturdays and Sundays. For 6 years, I consistently worked 65 hours weeks. My social life suffered, and my well-being occasionally took a toll, but I stayed focused on my objective. Ultimately, at 31, I had sufficient funds saved for the initial payment on a modest studio apartment in a respectable locale. It was nothing luxurious, just under 650 square feet, with appliances that had seen better eras, but it was unconditionally mine. The day I signed those lending documents was the proudest chapter of my life. Meanwhile, Jocelyn had wed Preston, an affluent real estate magnate, 8 years prior. Their wedding was an extravagant function at a mountain resort. $60,000 was spent on that single occasion, completely paid for by our parents, who re-secured a loan on their property to afford it. I recall my mother commenting that no expense should be spared for Jocelyn's exceptional day, while my father affirmed her sentiment with a nod. After the nuptials, Jocelyn and Preston maintained a luxurious existence. They acquired a sprawling estate in an exclusive neighborhood, drove coordinated prestige vehicles, and took elaborate international journeys 3 times annually. Jocelyn never held a consistent occupation, instead meandering between various passion projects, a textile design venture that never took off, a homemade soap business that dissolved quickly, and a digital lifestyle platform with 14 subscribers. Preston financed all of it without a word of complaint. I maintained a pleasant but distant association with my immediate family during these years. I appeared for the monthly Sunday brunches, listened as Jocelyn rambled about her latest high-end shopping sprees, and skillfully avoided my mother's not-so-subtle observations regarding my humble lifestyle and how I ought to find a suitable young woman and establish a life soon. I would drive back to my unit feeling like an outsider in my own bloodline, but I had come to terms with it, or so I believed. Everything shifted the preceding March. Preston's investment conglomerate had been struggling for a number of months, although they maintained their facade. Ill-advised investments and a market contraction had eroded much of their fortune. The fissures in Jocelyn and Preston's marriage, previously concealed under a shell of prosperity, suddenly deepened into chasms. After 8 years of marriage, they were divorcing. It began with an unusual communication from my mother. "Logan, darling, we would genuinely love to have you for supper this Thursday." Her voice possessed that syrupy tone she only employed when she was seeking something. Still, I consented to attend, anticipating nothing beyond the typical family gathering. When I arrived, I was surprised to find my favorite meal had been prepared: ribeye steak with whipped potatoes and seasoned green beans. My father uncorked a bottle of premium single malt scotch he had been saving, and my mother persistently refilled my plate. They inquired about my career, my social circle, and even recalled asking about a data processing project I had mentioned several months prior. It was surreal. In 32 years, I had never received this level of positive attention from them. Following dinner, we relocated to the den, where my parents exchanged significant glances before my father cleared his throat. "Son, we need to talk about something serious with you. It involves Jocelyn." My mother interjected, her voice faintly shaking. "She and Preston are separating. It's dreadful, simply dreadful." "I'm sorry to hear that," I responded, and I meant it. Despite our disagreements, I never wished hardship upon my sister. "There's more," my father continued, his expression serious. "Preston lost nearly everything in a series of failed investments. The mansion, the vehicles, everything they owned was collateralized. Jocelyn she is in a precarious financial situation." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin. "She requires capital for legal services and to maintain her quality of life until everything is resolved. Preston is being absolutely uncooperative regarding support." I nodded empathetically, still not grasping where this was heading. "That sounds difficult. I'm certain she will recover, though." My parents exchanged yet another look. Then my father dropped the bombshell. "We believe you ought to sell your apartment to assist Jocelyn." I stared at him, convinced I had misunderstood. "Your apartment," my mother reiterated, as if I were being willfully dense. "You could sell it and relocate to a rented unit. The housing sector is booming currently, and you would realize a healthy gain. That capital could truly help Jocelyn regain stability." The room appeared to spin as their words registered. They wanted me to sell my residence, the single thing I had labored for 6 years to achieve, to fund Jocelyn's divorce and lifestyle? "That is absolutely not happening," I stated plainly. My father's demeanor hardened. "Logan, family must unite in times of crisis. Jocelyn needs our assistance." "And I am willing to help," I countered, "but I am not selling my apartment. I could offer her a short-term loan of some hundreds of dollars for pressing expenditures, but you are discussing my home." My mother's sympathetic facade dissolved. "It is merely an apartment, Logan. Jocelyn is contemplating having to move into some appalling small space. She is not prepared for that sort of existence." And I was? The words erupted before I could stop them. I worked 65-hour weeks for 6 years to acquire that apartment. I lived with flatmates in a place the size of your utility room. I skipped holidays and missed friends' milestone celebrations because I could not afford the travel. And now you expect me to relinquish all that because Jocelyn and her spouse made poor financial decisions? My father rose, his face flushed with indignation. "That is unfair. Jocelyn deserves a certain standard of living. She was not raised to suffer difficulties." And I was? I looked from one parent to the other, an entire lifetime of unequal treatment crystallizing into perfect clarity. Listen to yourselves. You have continuously provided Jocelyn with everything while expecting me to manage with less. Not this time. Not with my home. I seized my coat and headed for the exit. My mother trailed me, pleading, "Logan, be sensible. What Jocelyn is enduring is far worse than anything you have experienced. She is accustomed to having luxury items." I turned to confront them one last time. "Then perhaps it is time she becomes unaccustomed to it. My response is no." I drove back, enveloped in a fog of fury and disbelief. Over the subsequent few weeks, my phone was inundated with communications from my parents and Jocelyn. My mother sent guilt-inducing texts about family loyalty and how disappointed she was in me. My father's messages were briefer but more ominous, hinting that I would regret my self-interest. Jocelyn alternated between tearful appeals about being forced into living in squalor and angry accusations that I was reveling in her misfortune. I ceased answering their calls, but preserved every communication. A premonition told me I might require them later. After 4 weeks of this behavior, they escalated. I was at work, in the middle of a strategic planning session, when our front desk assistant called to say my parents were in the reception area, demanding to speak to me immediately. I excused myself, feeling mortified, and went to manage the situation. They stood in the lobby of my office building, my mother dabbing dramatically at her eyes, while my father paced. Several of my colleagues were observing with curiosity from a distance. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, attempting to steer them towards the exit. "You would know if you answered our calls," my father snapped. "This has gone on long enough, Logan. Jocelyn is facing eviction from her temporary rental. She needs that money now." I felt a rush of anger at their intrusion into my professional space. "This is wholly inappropriate. I am working. Your sister's life is disintegrating, and all you care about is your job?" My mother's voice escalated, drawing more attention. "Mom, please lower your voice," I pleaded. "This is not the venue." My father stepped nearer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Heed me carefully. Either you do the right thing and assist your sister, or we will take action. We supported you, subsidized your education, and helped you get to where you are. You are indebted to this family." I stared at him, staggered by the threat. "Are you serious right now?" "Grave serious," he replied. "Consider it, son. Do the right thing." After they departed, I returned to my meeting but was unable to concentrate. My hands shook slightly as I recorded notes. My team leader asked if everything was fine, and I mumbled something about family complications. Back at my workstation, I stared at my monitor, trying to process the confrontation. That evening, I called my sister directly, hoping to negotiate a reasonable compromise. "Jocelyn, I understand you are undergoing a stressful period. I cannot sell my apartment, but I could lend you $3,500 to assist with immediate costs." Her laughter was sharp and resentful. $3,500? That would barely cover 3 weeks' rent, Logan. It is what I can responsibly offer without compromising my own financial security, I clarified. I could also help you search for a more economical residence, or perhaps aid with your resume so you could secure employment. A job? She spat the word as if it were insulting. I haven't worked in 8 years, and I am absolutely not living in some pest-infested slum. Then I don't know what to tell you, Jocelyn. I cannot resolve this issue for you, not in the manner you demand. Her voice hardened. You will regret this, Logan. Dad was correct about you. You have perpetually been envious of me, and now you are enjoying witnessing my distress. I suggested she explore less expensive legal options, perhaps arbitration, instead of a prolonged court battle. I offered to research some resources for newly separated women. Every suggestion was met with disdain and dismissal. Nothing would suffice except me liquidating my unit to finance her desired quality of life. I will never forget that morning. A forceful knock on my door at 7:45 a.m. A stranger in a mediocre suit handed me an envelope. "You have been legally served," he said flatly, then walked away. Inside was a civil action. The plaintiffs, Elias and Vivian Carter, my own parents. They were suing me for dependent support obligations and the recovery of developmental and educational investment. I sat at my kitchen table reading the legal document repeatedly, unable to comprehend what was happening. My own parents were taking me to court to compel me to sell my home to support my sister. The lawsuit alleged that they had invested significantly in my education and career progress with the reasonable expectation of familial reciprocity. They were seeking $190,000, which they calculated I would clear after selling my apartment. My hands trembled as I called in sick to work. I could not face my associates, not with this hanging over me. Then I contacted the only lawyer I knew personally, Miles Chen, a university friend who specialized in domestic law. They cannot do this, Miles assured me, after reviewing the documents over lunch. This lawsuit has no legal standing whatsoever. Parents do not possess a right to be reimbursed for raising their children. But, Logan, he paused, contesting this will still necessitate your time and capital. They are hoping you will concede to avoid the inconvenience. I will not yield to extortion, I said, surprising myself with my determination. What is our next step? Miles consented to represent me at a discounted rate. As we prepared for the court date, we delved into my family's financial records, information we would need to counter their assertions. What we uncovered shocked me. My parents had been financially underwriting Jocelyn for years, even preceding her marital difficulties. They had resecured loans on their house not once, but 3 times. First for her wedding, then to invest in one of Preston's business attempts that ultimately collapsed, and a 3rd time last year to cover her accrued credit card debt. My sister and her husband had borrowed over $65,000 from my parents in the preceding 3 years alone, none of which had been reimbursed. Meanwhile, I, Logan, located every document pertaining to my own schooling and expenditures. My merit scholarship letters, my federal loan documents, receipts from the campus bookstore where I had been employed, evidence that I had financed the majority of my college tenure and fully supported myself throughout my adult life. The court day arrived on a cold Wednesday morning. I sat beside Miles at one table while my parents and their legal counsel sat at another. Jocelyn sat directly behind them, occasionally directing hostile glances my way. The magistrate, a seasoned woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, reviewed the documents before addressing the court. "I have examined the submissions in this matter," she began, "and I must confess I find the premise of this lawsuit quite extraordinary. Mr. and Mrs. Carter, you are suing your adult son to compel him to sell his dwelling to support his adult sister." My parents' attorney, a smooth-looking man in an expensive suit, stood. "Your Honor, this is a matter concerning familial responsibilities and the tacit understanding between parents and progeny. My clients invested substantially in their son's education and development." "Counselor," the magistrate interrupted, "are you asserting that there is a legally enforceable obligation for children to financially support their siblings at the parent's command?" "We are suggesting that in this particular instance, there was a pattern of family assistance, with the understanding that family resources would be pooled when required." Professional storytelling analysis. Miles Rose. "Your Honor, we possess evidence that not only did my client receive significantly less financial support than his sister throughout his life, but he has been financially self-sufficient since university. Furthermore, we have documentation demonstrating that the plaintiffs have extensively supported their daughter financially while affording minimal support to my client." The magistrate turned to my parents' lawyer. "Do you possess evidence of explicit promises made by the defendant to reimburse his parents or support his sister?" The lawyer paused. "It was an implicit agreement, Your Honor." The magistrate's expression made it clear what she thought of that rationale. "I understand. And is there evidence that the defendant is in a superior financial position than the plaintiffs to provide this support?" Miles interjected. "To the contrary, Your Honor, the plaintiffs own their home, possess retirement portfolios, and have the capacity to continue working. They are seeking to force my client to liquidate his only significant asset, his primary residence." The cross-examination proceeded for another hour, becoming increasingly uncomfortable for my parents as their financial decisions concerning Jocelyn came to light. Their lawyer attempted to depict me as ungrateful and self-centered, while Miles calmly presented evidence of my financial independence and prudence. Finally, the magistrate removed her spectacles and looked directly at my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter, this court cannot and will not enforce an implicit understanding that one adult child must liquidate their primary residence to support another adult child. Parents do not hold a legal right to dictate their adult children's financial choices or demand recompense for parental support." She turned to me briefly. "Mr. Walker, while I appreciate this has been a difficult family situation for you, the court finds no legal basis for your parents' claims." With that, she dismissed the case. The reaction was instant and unpleasant. As we exited the courtroom, my mother burst into tears, while my father's face turned an alarming shade of crimson. Jocelyn charged up to me in the corridor. "Are you satisfied now?" she yelled, drawing stares from everyone nearby. "You have ruined everything. Where am I expected to reside? What am I supposed to do?" My father joined in. "This is not finished, Logan. You may have prevailed in court, but you have lost your family. I hope that apartment was worth it." I stood there, absorbing their hostility, suddenly feeling eerily calm. "You initiated this, not me. You prioritized Jocelyn over me my entire life, and now you're angry because I would not sacrifice my future for her yet again. I am done being the family's emergency fund." I walked away, leaving them shouting in the courthouse hallway. Miles patted my shoulder as we left the building. "Are you okay?" I nodded slowly. "I think I will be." But something fundamental had shifted within me. I realized my family viewed me not as a person with my own aspirations and requirements, but as a resource to be exploited whenever Jocelyn needed rescuing. The realization was painful, but clarifying. After careful thought and discussion with Miles, I resolved to file a counterclaim for legal expenditures and emotional distress. It was not about retaliation. It was about establishing boundaries and consequences. The court ruled in my favor, awarding me $13,000 to cover my legal costs and additional damages. When the draft arrived, I did not deposit it immediately. Instead, I established a bursary fund at my former university, specifically for students without familial financial assistance. I titled it the Self-Made Scholarship and made the inaugural contribution with the entire sum from the counterclaim. It felt like converting something negative into something meaningful. What I never anticipated was what transpired next. A local news reporter who had been in the courthouse that day for a separate case heard about our domestic drama. She reached out to me for an interview, and after some hesitation, I consented. The article ran under the headline, "Local Tech Worker Sued by Parents for Not Bankrolling Sister's Opulent Life." The response was overwhelming. My inbox became filled with messages from individuals who had endured similar familial pressures. Some had capitulated and regretted it. Others had stood firm, like me, and faced recrimination. Many were currently struggling with entitled relatives and searching for the courage to set limits. Seeing this necessity, I launched an online support collective called Boundary Keepers, where people could share experiences and guidance. What started as a small forum expanded to over 2,500 members within months. We organized monthly virtual meetings where members could discuss strategies for maintaining healthy family relationships without compromising their own welfare. Concurrently, I was processing my own grief. Losing my family, imperfect as they were, left an empty space. I began consulting with a therapist who specialized in family separation. Dr. Sanchez helped me understand that standing up for myself was not self-serving but essential, and that the guilt I felt was ingrained in me by years of family dynamics designed to benefit Jocelyn at my expense. A family should elevate one another, not pull one another down, Dr. Sanchez informed me during one session. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do for someone is to cease enabling detrimental behavior. Gradually, I cultivated what therapists refer to as a voluntary family, friends who supported me unconditionally. My colleague, Jeremy, invited me to holiday gatherings when he learned I had no place to go. My neighbor, Sophia, checked in on me routinely and taught me her grandmother's traditional recipes. My cycling group became weekend companions. These affiliations helped fill the void left by my biological family. 7 months after the court ruling, I received a surprising electronic mail from Jocelyn. I got a job at Quick Start Marketing, an entry-level position at a digital agency. The salary is not vast, but it's a commencement. I replied with genuine encouragement, and our dialogue slowly resumed. She conceded that being forced to support herself had been the hardest thing I have ever done, but possibly the best thing for me. She had relocated to a small unit with a flatmate and was learning to manage her finances for the first time in her adult life. I won't apologize for you, but I am starting to recognize that maybe Mom and Dad did me a disservice by consistently making things too effortless. My parents took longer to exhibit any signs of change. The initial months were filled with aggressive messages that I eventually routed into a separate digital folder, but reality was forcing its own lessons. Unable to sustain the payments on their repeatedly mortgaged house, they had to downgrade to a smaller residence. My father, who had intended to retire that year, continued working. A year following the lawsuit, a letter arrived in my physical mailbox. Actual paper mail, not an email or text. It was from my parents, penned in my mother's recognizable hand. "We have had substantial time for reflection," it read. While we still believe families should support one another, we acknowledge now that we demanded too much of you while giving too much to Jocelyn. We cannot reverse the lawsuit or the hurtful words we spoke, but we want you to know we are attempting to comprehend your viewpoint. It was not a direct apology, but it was a step forward. I wrote back, keeping my reply kind but firm about my boundaries. As for me, my life continued to flourish. My work on the Boundary Keepers Forum attracted the attention of my company's leadership, who were impressed by my community engagement aptitude. They offered me a promotion to head a new strategic client relations department with a substantial raise. I invested in some modest enhancements to my apartment: new kitchen appliances, updated laminate flooring, a fresh coat of paint. Each modification made it feel more like the home I had fought to protect. I even began dating again, meeting Naomi through a friend's dinner gathering. She was a pediatric intensivist with a sharp wit and gentle eyes who understood boundaries in a way my family never had. On our fourth date, I recounted the entire saga. Instead of being put off, she squeezed my hand and said, "Standing up for yourself like that? That is incredibly attractive." Today, my apartment symbolizes far more than just real estate. It is a monument to my autonomy, a physical testament that I have the right to prioritize my own well-being. The lawsuit, painful as it was, compelled me to articulate and defend my boundaries in ways I might have otherwise avoided. I still hold out hope for eventual reconciliation with my parents, but only on conditions that respect our separate lives and decisions. Meanwhile, I find purpose in assisting others to navigate similar familial pressures. Every time someone in our forum shares a success story about standing up for themselves, I feel a sense of validation that extends beyond my own experience. The most profound lesson in all of this? Sometimes the most challenging choice is the one that leads to necessary personal growth, not just for yourself, but potentially for everyone involved. Setting boundaries is not selfish. It is an act of self-respect that can ultimately foster more authentic relationships. So, if you are confronting pressure from relatives who seem to value what you can offer them more than who you are, remember my narrative. You deserve to safeguard what you have worked for. Your dreams are important too. Have you ever had to make a tough decision to assert yourself against familial pressure? Share your story in the comments below. And if this narrative resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more accounts about establishing boundaries and finding resilience in difficult situations. Thank you for listening, and remember, true kinship champions your progression. It doesn't exploit it.